I didn't expect a thank you. I didn't expect a toast, a seat at the head table, or even my name written in icing on the cake. But I also didn't expect to be called just the babysitter at my own granddaughter's birthday party. My name is Margaret Turner. I'm 68, a grandmother, and the woman they called just the babysitter. But that day, I reminded them exactly who built the life they take for granted. It happened so casually, like I was a piece of furniture. There, but not really worth acknowledging. The day had started with so much hope. I'd woken up early, baked her favorite banana chocolate chip muffins, packed them carefully in a floral tin she'd painted herself when she was 5. I even ironed my best dress. The one she once said made me look like a queen. I'd been looking forward to this day for weeks. She was turning 10, double digits, a big deal. I remember arriving at the venue, a lavish rented space in the suburbs with glass walls, gold streamers, an indoor bouncy castle, and a hired magician. It was the kind of party I could never afford when I was raising my daughter. But I was happy for her, happy my granddaughter would grow up never knowing what it meant to want. I smiled and offered to help with setup. Balloons, cupcakes, centerpieces. The event planner looked at me like I didn't belong. My daughter, Anna, waved me off. "It's all handled, Mom. Just don't get in the way." So I stayed near the drinks table, out of sight, like a good ghost. As guests arrived, I greeted them with polite smiles. A few mothers glanced at me and asked, "Are you with the caterers?" I said no. They didn't ask again. The moment that really stuck, though, came when Anna's husband, Greg, was chatting with some of his colleagues. I happened to walk past them with a tray of napkins, just trying to be useful. One of them nodded in my direction and asked, "That your mother-in-law?" Greg laughed. Then he said it. "Oh no, that's not her grandma. That's just the babysitter." Just the babysitter. My fingers curled tighter around the napkin tray. I stood frozen for a beat, but none of them looked at me. None of them even cared that I was within earshot. I felt invisible. Anna didn't correct him. She was standing right there, holding a glass of champagne, smiling, pretending like she hadn't heard it either. But I saw the twitch at the corner of her mouth, the little smirk. She knew, and she said nothing. That's what gutted me more than the words themselves. Later, I overheard another mother say to her friend, "I thought the help wasn't supposed to mingle with the guests." They were talking about me. I wasn't even wearing a uniform. I was wearing the necklace Anna gave me on her wedding day. I stayed long enough to watch my granddaughter blow out her candles. She looked around the room, searching for me. Our eyes met. She waved. I waved back, but I didn't move closer. I wasn't invited to the family table. As gift opening began, I reached into my handbag and took out the envelope I had spent months preparing. A simple white envelope with a red ribbon around it. No glitter, no fanfare. I'd wanted to wait until the end of the party to hand it over privately, but something in me cracked wide open. I walked up to her, smiled gently, and said, "Happy birthday, sweetheart." She grinned and hugged me tightly. "Grandma, you came." That alone made everything else hurt 10 times more. I handed her the envelope and said, "Open this later, okay? It's special." She nodded excitedly and tucked it into her little purse. I turned, walked out the door, and didn't look back. No scene, no tears, no screaming, just one small envelope left behind. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that inside that envelope wasn't a check or a toy or a birthday card. It was a gift that would change her life forever. And by the time they realized it, the silence in that party room would echo far louder than anything I ever could have said. But before I tell you what was in that envelope, you need to know everything I gave up to get it, and how I ended up being just the babysitter to the very people who wouldn't exist without me. There's something cruel about watching your child turn into a stranger in front of you, not overnight, but piece by piece, over years. Before I became just the babysitter, I was Anna's everything. She was born on a stormy Wednesday night in late March. I still remember gripping the sides of that hospital bed, terrified and alone, as thunder shook the windows. Her father had walked out when I was 6 months pregnant, left a note, took his things, and disappeared without a trace. I never heard from him again. No calls, no child support, nothing. I was 23, broke, heartbroken, with a tiny baby who had colic and a scream that could rattle the walls. But I loved her with a desperation that frightened me. Like if I didn't pour everything into loving her, I might lose her too. We lived in a 1-bedroom apartment over a laundromat. The rent was cheap because the walls sweated detergent fumes and the ceiling leaked in winter. I'd put Anna's crib near the radiator and line the edges with towels to block the cold draft that snuck in through the warped windows. When I wasn't working, I was holding her, feeding her, singing off-key lullabies and praying to God I wouldn't fail her. I worked as a receptionist at a local clinic during the day and cleaned offices at night. It was exhausting. I once fell asleep standing in the elevator holding a mop. There were nights I'd come home to find Anna crying, her tiny body hot with fever, her hands reaching for me even in her sleep. I remember crouching on the bathroom floor one night, pressing my forehead to the cold tile, whispering, "I can't do this. I can't do this." But then she'd giggle in her sleep, and somehow I found the strength to keep going. She was 5 when I finally scraped together enough to move us into a small 2-bedroom rental in a better part of town. It wasn't much, but it had a yard, a bathtub with real hot water, and enough sunlight to make the windows glow in the mornings. I remember watching her run barefoot through the grass, her laughter echoing between the fences, thinking, I did this. I got her here. That's the thing about being a single mother. You don't get awards, you don't get applause, you get blisters and back pain and barely enough sleep to function. But the first time your child hugs you and says, "Thank you, Mommy," it feels like winning the lottery. Anna was a bright child, sharp, kind, full of questions. I did everything I could to nurture that. I enrolled her in the best public school I could find, signed her up for every library program, scrimped and saved to send her to summer camps and music lessons. I wanted her to grow up without the shadow of poverty weighing down her shoulders the way it had mine. By the time she was 16, she had a part-time job at a bookstore and dreams of going to college out of state. I worked double shifts and dipped into my emergency savings so she could take SAT prep classes and tour campuses. She got into a private university on a partial scholarship. The day we opened the acceptance letter, she jumped into my arms screaming. I cried for hours afterward, not because I was sad, but because I knew I'd have to take on a third job to cover what the scholarship didn't. I remember telling myself, just 4 more years. You've survived this long, you can survive 4 more. And I did. I cleaned houses during the day, worked as a night caretaker for an elderly woman with dementia, and ran errands on weekends just to keep up. I counted coins at gas stations, skipped lunches to pay for her textbooks, and patched up my old work shoes with glue instead of buying new ones. I never told her how bad it got. That sometimes I went to bed hungry, that there were days I couldn't afford my own medications because she needed something for school, that I once pawned the only piece of jewelry I owned, my grandmother's necklace, to pay her rent when she was living off campus. I didn't tell her because I didn't want her to feel guilty. That was the kind of love I gave, quiet, invisible, the kind you don't notice until it's gone. After college, she met Greg, clean cut, suit and tie, came from money. The first time she brought him home, I could feel his eyes scanning the tiny living room, the sag in the couch cushions, the outdated kitchen. He was polite, but cold, like someone tolerating a dinner they never wanted to attend. I told myself not to judge, but things changed quickly after they got engaged. Suddenly, my opinion didn't matter anymore. My name wasn't on the wedding planning spreadsheet. I was told I'd be sitting at table 5 with some of Greg's distant relatives instead of walking her down the aisle. She said it was just logistics. I paid for her dress anyway. Even then, I told myself, maybe I'm just overthinking. Maybe this is how things go when your child grows up. But the distance only grew. After the wedding, she called less, visited less. Holidays were awkward with Greg's family talking over me like I wasn't even there. I brought my homemade pies, but they stayed untouched next to the gourmet desserts they had flown in from New York. Then she got pregnant, and suddenly I was useful again. She asked if I could move closer, help out during maternity leave, be there just in case. I said yes without hesitation. I left behind the quiet life I had just started building for myself in a small condo I'd managed to buy, sold it at a loss just to be near her. I moved into a small rental, started babysitting full-time when the baby came. No pay, no complaints. I fed her, rocked her, sang her the same lullabies I once sang to Anna. I was there through teething, fevers, first words, first steps. When they took her to daycare, I became the emergency contact. When the nanny couldn't come, I filled in, and slowly it became the unspoken rule. Grandma's always there, until I became invisible again, just the one in the background holding the diaper bag, picking up after their mess. And at that birthday party, when Greg laughed and called me just the babysitter, I realized something sharp and gutting. I had given Anna everything. But somewhere along the way, she had started believing she was the one who had risen above me. She had learned to be embarrassed by the very hands that fed her, clothed her, gave her the life she now flaunted. That party wasn't just a party. It was a mirror that showed me exactly where I stood in their eyes. And it wasn't beside them. It was beneath them. But they didn't know who I really was. Not yet. They didn't know the truth about the envelope. They didn't know the truth about the fortune I had been quietly sitting on for the last 5 years. And they certainly didn't know that I was done playing the quiet, selfless role they had written for me. Not anymore. Because I wasn't just the babysitter. I was the one who raised the woman you now take for granted. I was the one who built the foundation of everything you now stand on. And the gift I left behind, it was going to remind you of that. Loudly. Indelibly, and forever. After I left the party, I walked down the sidewalk with my chin held high, but inside, I was shaking. Not with fear, not with shame, with restraint, because every fiber of me wanted to turn around, grab the microphone the magician was using, and say it all. Every sacrifice, every dollar I gave, every time I chose them over myself. I wanted to rip off the mask they'd forced me to wear for years, the one that made me invisible, the one labeled babysitter instead of mother. But I didn't, because I knew something they didn't. I knew what was inside that envelope. They thought it was a birthday card, maybe a check for a few $100s if I'd saved up. But it wasn't a check. It was a okoritiu document. Official. Notarized. And worth more than any present at that party, more than the cake flown in from New York, more than the bounce house and face painting fairy, and the party favors stuffed with $50 Sephora gift cards. It was a trust certificate. In my granddaughter's name, a $2.5 million trust, set up to become fully accessible on her 18th birthday, created solely by me, not Greg, not Anna, me. It didn't come from savings, and it sure didn't come from pity. It came from years of silence, years of being underestimated, years of showing up when no one else did. But most of all, it came from one woman. My former employer, Madeline Royce. I first met Madeline when I was 49 years old. My body was already tired by then, shoulders that ached from decades of physical labor, hands that trembled slightly when scrubbing countertops, a lower back that pinched every time I bent too far forward. I had been cleaning houses, doing laundry, and caring for other people's children for over 20 years. I answered an ad one afternoon. It was written plainly, typed out in black Arial font on a white flyer. Live-in caretaker needed, discretion required, excellent pay. I almost didn't go, but rent was creeping up, and Anna had just announced her engagement. There was no one else to help pay for the wedding, and I didn't want her to start her marriage in debt, so I went. The house was unlike anything I had ever seen in person. Massive iron gates, a driveway long enough to lose your breath halfway down, windows that touch the sky, and silence so deep it felt sacred. I almost turned around, convinced they'd taken one look at my thrift store handbag and thrown out my resume. But Madeline answered the door herself. She was in her early 70s, frail but elegant. Hair pinned into a silver twist, pearl earrings, lipstick the shade of crushed raspberries. She looked me up and down, then said, "Good. You look like someone who knows when to speak and when to stay quiet. Come in." That was the start of everything. Madeline didn't need someone to push her wheelchair or spoon-feed her soup. She needed companionship, conversation, someone who wouldn't talk to her like a patient or a child. She had no husband, no children. She had been one of the first female executives in a Fortune 500 company, and she built a vast empire on her own. But time doesn't care how powerful you are. Eventually, your body slows. The phone stops ringing. The invitations disappear. So we became unlikely friends. She taught me how to play the piano, how to appreciate art, how to read poetry aloud without sounding embarrassed. I taught her how to make meatloaf that didn't taste like wallpaper paste. I read to her when her eyes grew tired. I helped her arrange her pills and clip coupons, even though she had more money than she could spend in 5 lifetimes. We talked. We laughed. Sometimes we sat in silence. She never made me feel like I was staff. Never once introduced me as help. She called me Margaret. Just that. And when she passed away in her sleep one spring morning, her attorney showed up with a sealed envelope and a trembling voice. "She left you something," he said. "Actually, everything." I thought I misheard. But no. She had written me into her will as the sole beneficiary. The house, the investments, the accounts, all of it. "I have no heirs," her letter read. "But if I did, I would want them to have your heart. You gave me the one thing no one else could, dignity. And for that, I give you the freedom I know you never had." The total value after taxes, legal deductions, and transfers? $8.3 million. I stared at the numbers until they blurred. My hands trembled so hard I had to sit down. That kind of money wasn't real to someone like me, not someone who had spent a lifetime folding other people's linens. I could have run away, started over, bought a villa in Spain and never looked back. But I didn't. Because even after all that, the first thought I had was, what can I do for Anna and the baby? I still wanted to give, still wanted to be useful. So I bought the house they live in now, cash. Let Greg believe his down payment had gone through. Let Anna think the loan had miraculously cleared with favorable terms. The deed was in their names. But every penny came from me. I never said a word. Because I didn't need credit. I just wanted them to have a good life. But over time, they stopped asking about how the house was paid for. They stopped thanking me for meals, for babysitting, for errands. My silence gave them permission to rewrite the story, and they rewrote me as just the babysitter. And so I stayed silent. Again. Until the birthday party. Until Greg's laugh. Until Anna's smirk. Until that tray of untouched cupcakes. Until the cake that cost more than my entire first-year college tuition. Until I finally realized they would never, ever see me for what I was. Because they never wanted to. So I gave the only person who ever looked at me with love, the only one who never judged me or asked me to disappear, the gift they all thought I couldn't afford to give. I gave her independence. I gave her the freedom to become anything she wants without owing anyone for it. I gave her the kind of life no one ever gave me, and I didn't leave a note. I didn't put my name on it, just a ribbon, red, the color of blood, of love, of fire. Because it was time to burn down the lie they'd built around me. I wasn't just the babysitter. I was the architect of everything they took for granted, and now that truth was sitting in my granddaughter's hands, quietly waiting to be opened. The thing about silence is, it doesn't stay quiet forever, not when it's holding something that big, Not when it lands in the hands of a 10-year-old girl too curious for her own good and too proud of her grandmother to keep something like that to herself. I had just gotten home from the party, slipped off my shoes, and placed the tin of untouched banana muffins on the counter when my phone buzzed. It was Anna. 5 missed calls, 1 text. What was in that envelope? No sorry about earlier. No, are you okay? No explanation, just straight to the point. I didn't answer. I knew her well enough to know that if she was texting instead of calling again, she wasn't just concerned, she was spiraling. It wasn't long before the second wave came. Greg. This time, it wasn't just a text, it was a voicemail. His voice was thin, rehearsed, falsely casual. Hey, Margaret, we were just wondering what that little card was about. Sophie showed it to one of the parents and said it was, like, money or something about a bank. She might have misunderstood, obviously. Ha 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 ha, but just let us know so we can clear it up. Thanks. I played the voicemail 3 times. Money, a little card, something to clear up. They had no idea yet, but they were beginning to suspect. And nothing exposes a person faster than the moment they realize someone they dismissed might actually hold power. I didn't reply. Instead, I made myself a cup of tea, sat down by the window, and turned off my phone. Let them stew. Let them whisper, fidget, guess. Because now, for once, the silence belonged to me. The next morning, a different tone. Anna again. This time more frantic. Mom, can you please call me? We really just need to know what that document was. Sophie won't stop talking about it. She said something about college money and freedom when I grow up, which sounds like something you'd say, but she told a bunch of kids and now parents are asking questions. There it was, the panic. Not because they were worried about Sophie's safety, not because they cared that I left the party without a goodbye, but because the optics were getting messy. People were talking, and in their world, gossip is currency. Still, I didn't reply, because I knew they weren't the only ones who'd seen it. One of the other moms must have taken a picture of the trust certificate, snapped a shot while Sophie waved it proudly like a golden ticket. Someone must have zoomed in, read the name, seen the seals, the bank letterhead, because by that afternoon, the whispers had become something else entirely. I went to the grocery store the next day, my usual place, nothing fancy. But suddenly, people looked at me differently. The cashier, who usually tossed my receipt at me without a glance, offered to carry my bag to the car. The woman in line behind me smiled too long. Are you Sophie's grandmother? She asked, her voice sugar-sweet. I am, she nodded slowly. She's such a bright girl. Must get that from somewhere. Then she added, my daughter came home from the party just raving about your gift, said it was the talk of the evening. There it was, the spark. The match dropped into a dry forest. The story was spreading. By evening, my phone had lit up again like a Christmas tree. I turned it back on out of pure curiosity. Dozens of messages. A voicemail from Susan, Greg's mother, the woman who once looked me in the face and said, we admire how hard you've worked. Not everyone is meant for ambition. Her message dripped with faux sincerity. Margaret, darling, it's Susan. We were all just so moved to hear about the trust you left Sophie. It's absolutely beautiful and such a smart investment for her future. I mean, of course, we'd love to chat more about how to incorporate you into the family's financial planning, since obviously you're involved now. Now? After 10 years of watching me take buses in the rain to babysit their child, now I was involved? They still didn't get it. They still thought it was about access, about control. They didn't realize that I hadn't just given Sophie a trust fund. I'd lit a fuse, because the minute that document was shared, the narrative flipped. I was no longer the tired old woman carrying diaper bags and grocery sacks. I was the woman who walked into a 10-year-old's party and changed her future with one piece of paper, not with fanfare, not with glitter, with dignity. The day after that, the godmother made it worse for them, deliciously worse. She posted a photo on Instagram, Sophie holding the envelope with a giant smile. The caption said, "Not all heroes wear capes. Sometimes they wear discount sneakers and make their own banana muffins. Happy birthday, Sophie. You've got the best grandmother in the world." The post went viral in the community. Hundreds of comments flooded in. This is what real love looks like. She deserves a statue or a TED Talk. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law brought expired cookies to our party. Greg and Anna? Radio silence. For about 24 hours. Then I got a knock on my door. I peeked through the window and almost laughed. Anna stood there holding a bouquet of expensive roses and a gift basket, one of those oversized ones with overpriced chocolate and imported jam. She smiled like a hostage. I opened the door just enough to step outside and block her view in. "Hi, Mom," she said, nervously shifting the basket. "Can we talk?" I folded my arms. "About?" Her voice cracked slightly. About everything. About the party. About Sophie. I just want to clear the air." She looked like she'd rehearsed the line in front of a mirror 20 times. I didn't move. She offered the flowers. "These are for you." I didn't take them. She held them there a little too long, then finally dropped her arm. "Mom," she said, softer this time, "I didn't know how to explain it that day. I didn't mean to hurt you. We were just trying to balance everything. It wasn't personal." I raised an eyebrow. "It was about optics, right?" She looked down at her feet. "I didn't fit the image," I said. "That it?" Anna's mouth opened, but no words came. I let the silence linger, let her sit in it. Finally, she said, I didn't know you had that kind of money." "And if I didn't," I asked, my voice flat, "would you be here right now?" She didn't answer. I nodded slowly. "That's what I thought." Then I looked her square in the eye and said something I hadn't said in 10 years. "You don't get to rewrite history just because it's suddenly inconvenient." Her eyes welled up. But I wasn't moved. Not anymore, because I had spent a lifetime trying to earn love from people who only knew how to take. And now that I had something they couldn't control, they were scrambling, not to love me, but to reposition me, to find a seat for me at their table. After. I built the house, but I wasn't hungry anymore, and I wasn't staying for dessert. The flowers wilted in the hallway. She left them at my door, still wrapped in cellophane, hoping I'd change my mind overnight. I didn't. 2 days passed. Greg tried calling, then texting, then tried to get Sophie to ask me to just talk to Mommy for a bit. But by then, even she could tell something was wrong. The worst part? She thought it was her fault. "Did I say something bad, Grandma?" she asked over FaceTime, voice small, eyes downcast. I nearly broke. I told her gently, "No, sweetheart. You did something very brave. You told the truth, and that's never wrong." She nodded, but I could see the conflict behind her eyes, the push and pull of a child caught between two worlds, my world full of banana muffins and bedtime stories, and theirs, full of curated brunches, sterile apologies, and well-dressed silence. The next bomb dropped on Sunday morning. Greg's company was featured in a local newsletter, an interview he had done months ago, but the editor added a quote pulled from one of the birthday party attendees, now going viral online. "It was surreal," the quote said. "They treated the woman who raised their daughter like hired help, but she gave the only gift that mattered. Real wealth isn't always about money. Sometimes it's the kind that humbles you." The article didn't mention names, but everyone in the community knew. That was enough. That afternoon, Greg called me again. This time, not with nervous charm, but with simmering panic. "Margaret, this is getting out of control. People are calling me a freeloader. My mother's friends think I married into your money. Anna's brand partnership declined a renewal. Do you know how hard we've worked for our image?" Image. That word again, the same image that made them seat me near the trash bins at Thanksgiving, the same image that made Anna whisper, "Don't wear your old coat," before school events, the same image that made Greg smirk when someone mistook me for a cleaning lady. Now it was crumbling, and the only thing they wanted more than silence was control. But that ship had already sunk. I told him plainly, "I didn't make you look bad, Greg. You did that all on your own." He started to protest, but I hung up. I had better things to do. That evening, I got a call from an unexpected number. It was the headmaster of Sophie's school. He sounded formal, guarded, but also curious. "Mrs. Turner," he said, "I've been asked by the board to extend an invitation. We're opening applications for a new scholarship foundation. We'd love for you to consider being a named benefactor." I blinked. "Why me?" He cleared his throat. "Well, let's just say your generosity has caught the attention of a few key families and a few board members. So that's what I'd become now, a desirable name, a seat at the table. Not because they wanted me there, but because they wanted the weight of what I represented: wealth, attention, story." Meanwhile, Anna's text messages changed tone. They shifted from guilt to charm, then from charm to entitlement. One in particular stood out. "Mom, I'm not trying to be rude, but don't you think it's fair for the parents to have some say in how that money is handled? I mean, Sophie's still a kid, and we're her guardians. I just think we should have access in case of emergencies." Access. That word made me laugh out loud. She thought she still had the right to make requests. After everything, she thought the bridge hadn't burned just because she could still see the smoke. I didn't reply. Instead, I sat at my piano, the one I bought after years of skipping luxuries, saving pennies, denying myself joy, and played something light, something elegant, something no one ever taught me to play, because I'd taught myself, the same way I taught myself to survive, the same way I taught myself to let go. But I wasn't the only one letting go. Whispers began surfacing that Anna and Greg weren't exactly aligned anymore. I heard it from a friend of a friend at the school pickup line, that Anna was furious with Greg for letting it escalate, that Greg blamed Anna for not warning him about the inheritance. They fought during a parent-teacher meeting, in public, and apparently Anna's brand partnership hadn't just declined a renewal. They'd terminated early, citing misalignment with community values. Anna's curated life was unraveling. The online moms she used to post recipe swaps with, silent. The women who once gushed over her nursery paint choices, now too busy for coffee. That's the thing about building a life on image. When it cracks, it doesn't just chip, it shatters. A week later, Greg's mother Susan came knocking, in person. She stood on my porch in a faux fur coat with sunglasses bigger than her pride. "Margaret," she said flatly, "we need to talk." "No," I said. "You need to listen." She scoffed. "You're really enjoying this, aren't you? Playing queen with your secret millions. You couldn't just let the party go, could you? Had to make a scene." I stepped out, closed the door behind me, and met her gaze. "I didn't make a scene," I said. "I left quietly. What's causing you so much embarrassment now is the truth." She looked like she wanted to slap me, but instead she smiled, a dangerous, venomous little thing. "Careful, Margaret," she said. "Money doesn't make you family, it just makes you a target." I smiled back. "No, Susan, people like you make people like me a target. But I stopped being afraid of you a long time ago." And with that, I turned and went back inside. I didn't hear from them for a while after that. No calls, no texts, not even Sophie's usual goodnight message. I missed her, terribly. But I wasn't going to bend just to keep her near, because what was the point of giving her a future if I couldn't show her what dignity looked like? Love without boundaries isn't love, it's servitude. And I had served long enough. Then came the call I wasn't expecting, from the bank. Mrs. Turner, this is just a courtesy check, the manager said. There was an attempted inquiry into the trust account created for Miss Sophia Turner. It was unauthorized. I was quiet for a moment. Who tried to access it? He cleared his throat. I'm afraid I can't say, but we've flagged the attempt and locked all access unless confirmed through your voice ID directly. We've also reported it to the trust's legal overseers. I knew who it was. I didn't even need to ask. They weren't done trying, but they were about to learn. I wasn't the same woman who used to clean their kitchen floors and smile through being ignored. I was the woman who could rewrite the future of their daughter with one decision. And I hadn't even started yet. It happened on a Thursday morning, one of those clear, cold days where the sky looks too honest. I was at the park sitting on a bench with my coffee, watching the wind blow through the brittle trees. My peace was fragile, but intact, until Anna showed up. She didn't text, she didn't call, she just appeared, coat buttoned tight, sunglasses hiding her face, moving fast like someone trying to get ahead of a storm. She didn't even say hello. "Why would you do this to me?" she snapped, standing in front of me like a prosecutor. "To us?" I blinked. "You're going to have to be more specific." She pulled off her sunglasses, revealing eyes swollen from crying, or maybe anger, maybe both. "You left that envelope like it was a gift," she hissed, "but you knew what it would do. You knew how it would make us look, like we were—" "Exactly what you were," I asked calmly. Her mouth froze mid-sentence. "Do you hear yourself, Anna?" I added. "You're not upset that I gave your daughter something. You're upset that people found out what I gave her and that I didn't run it through you first." Her voice rose. "Because I'm her mother. I'm the one raising her. I deserve to know what kind of money is being put in her name, how it affects her, her safety, her—" "No," I interrupted. "You deserve nothing. Not from me. Not after the way you've treated me for the last 10 years. She took a step back like I'd slapped her. But I didn't raise my voice. I didn't curse. I didn't spit venom. I just told the truth. And sometimes the truth is sharper than any knife. "Do you remember," I asked, "when you got accepted into that overpriced college across the country?" She didn't reply. "I sold my wedding ring to afford your dorm deposit. I skipped lunch for 3 months straight so you could buy textbooks. And when you cried on the phone that you couldn't keep up, I took on a third job so I could send you $200 every Friday. Still nothing. So no, Anna. You don't get to be mad that I gave something to your daughter, especially not when you've forgotten everything I ever gave you." Her lips trembled. "I didn't forget." "Yes," I said. "You did." I stood, grabbed my coat, and looked her in the eyes. "You forgot who I was the moment Greg's mother raised her eyebrow at my shoes. You forgot who I was the second someone asked if I was your maid. You forgot when you let your husband call me just the babysitter in a room full of strangers, and you laughed." She didn't deny it, didn't even try. She just whispered, "You blindsided me, Mom. You never told me you had money." "No," I said, "because I was trying to protect you from greed, from entitlement. And now I see, maybe I failed." She sat down on the bench, suddenly small. "I didn't think you'd walk out," she said softly. That's when I realized the truth. She hadn't come here to apologize. She'd come to fix it, to glue the cracks shut, to slap on a smile and stitch the illusion back together. But I wasn't made of illusions anymore. I sat down next to her. "You know what the hardest part of all this is?" I said. She shook her head. "It's knowing that I raised you with everything I had, all my time, my youth, my health, my dreams. I poured it into you like water into soil, but what grew from it—" I looked at her. What grew wasn't love, it was control, ego. Distance tears slipped down her cheeks, silent, slow, and I almost felt the urge to reach out, to comfort her. But then she asked the one question I hadn't expected. "What if Sophie resents me one day for what I did to you?" I didn't answer at first. because I wanted her to sit with it. Because that, right there, was the first real crack in the mask she'd worn for years. Not because of the money, not because of the press, because of fear. Fear that the child she loved might look at her one day the same way she looked at me now, not with admiration, but with shame. "I don't know," I said finally. "That depends." "On what?" "On what you do next." She stared at me. "What does that mean?" I turned to face her fully. "It means this is the moment you choose whether to repeat history or change it." That night, I got a text from Sophie. A picture of her diary open to a page with a big heart drawn in red crayon. Inside it were the words, "I love Grandma because she sees me." I cried harder than I had in years, because no matter how painful the rest of it was, no matter how ugly, how petty, how humiliating, that one sentence made it all worth it. She saw me, and because she did, I would make sure no one could ever erase me again. The following weekend, I received a formal letter from Anna and Greg's lawyer. It wasn't threatening, not exactly, but it was clear. They wanted a meeting. They wanted to revisit the structure of the trust, to discuss possible revisions to the release timeline, to ensure parental oversight was maintained. I didn't even finish reading it. I forwarded it to my own attorney with one line. "Tell them no." They wanted control. But that gift was never about control. It was about freedom. The kind they'd never understand. Because it doesn't come from power. It comes from letting go. And I had finally let go of the version of my daughter I thought still existed, of the guilt that chained me to their approval, of the role they wrote for me and forced me to play. I had stepped off their stage, and I was never walking back on. I didn't think they'd actually try it. Not after everything. Not after the public unraveling. Not after the godmother's viral post. Not after I'd said no so many times they should have heard it ringing in their ears every time they blinked. But when greed blinds you, you don't stop at the edge of the cliff. You jump. And they jumped. Greg specifically. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I got the call from my attorney. Her voice was sharper than usual, clipped, precise. "Margaret, we have an issue," she said. "Your son-in-law filed a petition to reassign fiduciary control of Sophie's trust." I blinked. "He what?" "He's claiming that you created the trust without consulting the legal guardians and that his daughter's welfare could be jeopardized if you remain sole manager of the funds. He's asking for joint access, retroactively." My blood ran cold. And the court accepted the filing? They didn't grant the request, not yet, but it's been scheduled for a hearing. He's pushing hard. The argument he's making, it's calculated. He's using language like questionable financial practices and elder isolation. He's trying to make you look unstable, possibly even manipulated by someone. I laughed bitterly. Manipulated? I'd spent the last 30 years cleaning other people's mistakes, sacrificing my dignity to give their family a house, a future, a foundation. Now I was being painted as unstable, as unfit. "Let them try," I said. But privately, I was rattled, not because I feared losing the case. I had airtight documentation. The trust was solid, the funds secure. Everything was legal, notarized, and handled with more care than Greg had ever shown toward anything that didn't directly benefit him. What rattled me was that they were willing to drag Sophie into this, willing to put their daughter through a legal process, a courtroom, news whispers, and family collapse, just to get their hands on money that was never meant for them. I pictured her small fingers tracing the ribbon I'd tied around the envelope, her wide eyes when she read the words inside, the joy, the innocence. And now this, court filings, greedy arguments, lawyers picking apart the intentions behind a grandmother's love. I wasn't angry. I was disgusted. Later that week, I received an email from the school principal, not the headmaster this time. This was direct. Apparently, Greg had begun contacting faculty members privately, trying to dig for anything he could twist into ammunition. Was Margaret ever late to pickup? Has she ever acted confused or disoriented? Do you feel she's overly attached to Sophie? He was trying to build a profile, a case, anything that made me seem off. But what he didn't realize, what he never learned, is that while he was busy building image, I was building integrity. And that kind of foundation doesn't crack under pressure. It holds. The final straw came on a Saturday morning. I was sitting on the porch, watering my flowers, when a black SUV pulled up to the curb. I knew the license plate. I knew that smug idol of the engine, like the car itself believed it was too good for the street it rolled down. Greg stepped out wearing his usual too-tight polo and his too expensive loafers. No Anna, just him. He walked up the steps like he owned them, like he hadn't tried to have me legally stripped of my rights just days earlier. He didn't even pretend to be polite. "We need to talk," he said. I didn't move, just kept watering the soil around my lavender. "Greg," I said, "if you're here to apologize, you've got 5 minutes. If not, you've got 5 seconds. He smirked. "I'm here to offer a compromise." I nearly laughed. That's rich coming from the man who tried to take me to court behind my back. He waved a hand, as if legal betrayal was just a mild inconvenience. "Look," he said, lowering his voice, "we both know Sophie isn't going to know what to do with that kind of money at 18. You're being emotional, not practical. This is about legacy, about structure, about making sure it doesn't get squandered." I set the watering can down slowly. "She's 10 years old, Greg. She still sleeps with a nightlight, and you're already circling her future like a vulture." He bristled. "That money should be used to benefit the whole family. It's not just hers. It's part of her upbringing, our life, Anna's stability." And there it was, the truth, the rot behind the words. It was never about Sophie. It was about them. Their mortgage, their image, their lifestyle. They saw her trust not as a gift, but as a tool, a pot to dip into, a buffer between them and the consequences of their own mediocrity. "Let me guess," I said. "You want a portion released early, for tuition, for renovations, for emergencies." He stiffened. "We wouldn't ask for anything unreasonable." I stepped closer, looked him right in the eyes. "You already have." He turned on his heel and stormed off, but not before hurling one last pathetic attempt at intimidation over his shoulder. "You think people are going to keep seeing you as the victim forever? That halo of yours won't last. You're not a saint, Margaret, just a lonely old woman who got lucky." I didn't respond, didn't shout, didn't chase. Because nothing scares a man like Greg more than a woman who doesn't need to raise her voice to be powerful. That afternoon, I called my attorney and told her to proceed. We wouldn't just defend the trust, we'd expand it. We'd file a counterclaim to prevent any future attempts to access the funds. We'd issue a public statement if needed. We'd make it clear, this money belongs to Sophie, no one else, no compromises. 2 days later, I received a message from Anna. No greetings, no excuses, just one line. "Why are you doing this to us?" I stared at it for a long time. Then I wrote back, "Because you already did it to me. I'm just making sure your daughter doesn't learn the same cruelty you did." And I didn't hear from her again. Children know more than we think, even when they don't have the words, even when they can't put it all together. They feel the shift in a room, the tightness in a voice, the absence of eye contact between grown-ups who once smiled across dinner tables. Sophie was 10, but she wasn't blind. And after everything, after the envelope, the whispers, the stories reshaping themselves around her like wildfire, she began to understand something most adults take a lifetime to learn. That love and loyalty aren't always the same thing. I hadn't seen her since the party. Weeks had passed. I was trying to give her space, trying not to turn her into collateral damage, but one afternoon she showed up on my doorstep, alone. Backpack slung over one shoulder, sneakers dusty, braids slightly frizzed like she'd been walking fast. No car idling behind her. No Anna. No Greg. Just her. I opened the door, and for a moment neither of us spoke. Then she looked up at me and said, "I told them I was going to Mia's." I lied. My heart ached. "You shouldn't lie, baby." "I know," she said, stepping inside, "but I really needed to see you." I closed the door behind her slowly. She walked into the living room like it was muscle memory, like this space still held the quiet comfort of banana muffins and bedtime stories. She dropped her backpack and turned to face me, her voice steady in a way no child's voice should have to be. "Are you mad at me?" I almost laughed, heartbroken at the idea that she thought any of this came from her. "No, sweetheart, never." She nodded, eyes shiny. "They said you don't want to see me anymore." I knelt in front of her, held her face gently in my hands. "Listen to me," I said. "There is nothing you could do to make me stop wanting to see you. You hear me? Nothing." She threw her arms around me, and I felt her whole body collapse into my chest. 10 years old, 10 years of carrying innocence like it was armor. And now, the world had poked so many holes in it, she didn't know what was safe anymore. We sat on the couch. She talked. I listened. She told me how the kids at school kept asking questions, how their parents had started talking, how Greg yelled when he found out she showed the trust paper to her friend. "Mom said I made a mess of things," she whispered. I kept my voice calm. "You didn't make a mess. You told the truth." She looked at her hands. "Is it really for me, the money?" I nodded. "Every cent." "Why?" That question hit harder than I expected, not because it was difficult to answer, but because it was so sad that she had to ask it at all. I reached for her hand. "Because you are the kind of person who sees people, really sees them. You saw me when no one else did, and I wanted to give you something that no one could take from you, not your parents, not money, not the world." She was quiet then. "They said you're trying to take me away from them." I closed my eyes for a moment, breathed in. "No," I said softly. "I'm trying to protect you from becoming like them." The room was still, and then she reached into her backpack and pulled out something small, a folded piece of notebook paper, crinkled edges, faded ink. She unfolded it and held it out. "I wrote this for school," she said. "We were supposed to write about someone we admire." I took it. I read slowly. "The person I admire most is my grandma. She doesn't wear fancy clothes or drive a shiny car, but she always shows up when it matters. She knows how to fix a loose button and bake the best muffins. She listens even when I don't have the right words. She makes me feel like I'm enough. She's not loud, but when she talks, people listen. I want to grow up and be just like her, because she's the kind of strong that doesn't need to yell to be heard." I wiped my eyes and looked at her. "I'm framing this," I said. She smiled. Then, in a voice so small I almost missed it, "Can I come here after school sometimes again?" My throat tightened. I'd like nothing more. She stayed for dinner that night. We made grilled cheese just like we used to, and sat cross-legged on the living room rug with tomato soup in chipped bowls. She asked about Madeline, the woman who left me the inheritance. I told her stories about our quiet afternoons and how Madeline taught me the difference between expensive and valuable. "She sounds like you," Sophie said. "No," I replied. "She believed in me before I ever knew how to believe in myself. You remind me of her." She beamed. That night I called Anna. I didn't have to, but I did. She picked up on the second ring, voice tight, braced. "Sophie's with me," I said. Silence. She came on her own. She needed to talk, and I let her. More silence. "She's staying for the evening. I'll drop her home tomorrow. I wanted you to hear it from me." Anna exhaled. "She told me she was with a friend. She lied because she knew what the truth would cost her." No reply. "I won't let you punish her for this, Anna." "She's 10, Anna snapped. She shouldn't be in the middle of this. Then stop putting her there. Silence again. Then she said, "You really think I've failed her, don't you?" I answered without hesitation. "I think you forgot who you were, and she sees it more clearly than anyone." That night, Sophie fell asleep on my couch, her head in my lap, her breath soft and even, and I sat there in the quiet dark, stroking her hair, realizing something I hadn't dared admit before. This fight wasn't just about inheritance. It wasn't even about betrayal anymore. It was about a girl and the woman she'd become, and the choice she would one day face, whether to inherit her mother's cruelty or her grandmother's courage. The hearing was set for a Wednesday morning. I wore gray slacks, a soft blouse, and my late mother's pin, the one shaped like a rose, slightly tarnished but unbroken. I didn't wear makeup. I didn't try to look younger or richer or harder. I just came as myself, which is more than I could say for Greg and Anna. He wore a navy suit, hair too styled for sincerity. She wore her version of sober elegance, black dress, pearls, eyes hidden behind massive sunglasses she didn't remove once inside the building. They looked like a grieving couple, except the only thing they were mourning was control. The courtroom wasn't large. It didn't need to be. This wasn't a high-profile trial, at least not yet. But word had spread. A few local parents had shown up to observe. A blogger I didn't recognize sat near the back. One of the PTA women clutched a notepad. The judge was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, sharp eyes and a clipped tone. She opened the session by asking both parties to remain calm, respectful, and brief. Greg's lawyer was the first to speak. He painted a portrait, a sweet, overworked couple concerned about their daughter's future, a trust they'd never been informed of, a grandmother acting unilaterally and secretively. Hints, carefully placed, about my emotional instability, my recent obsession with online attention, and possible cognitive decline. I almost laughed. Then he called me to the stand. "Mrs. Turner," he said, oozing concern, "why didn't you notify the child's parents when setting up this trust?" "Because it wasn't for them," I said. "It was for her." "But surely you understand how that might be confusing, even alarming to those responsible for her care." I nodded. "I do. But it wasn't a legal requirement. And I believed, correctly, it turns out, that notifying them would result in pressure, demands, and manipulation, which is exactly what's happened." He tried to push. "Are you under the care of any therapist or psychologist, Mrs. Turner?" I smiled slightly. Number though perhaps I should be, considering what I've put up with. There were a few stifled laughs in the room. Greg's jaw clenched. Anna still hadn't looked at me once. My lawyer was calm and precise. She submitted all the trust documents, verified my finances, displayed a timeline of Greg's financial behavior, including debts, defaults, and a history of questionable business write-offs. She referenced his recent attempts to obtain Sophie's Social Security number. She read emails aloud, emails where Greg had asked how to reallocate funds and streamline family wealth access. Then she called a surprise witness, Sophie's godmother. She stood tall and fierce in her heels, holding nothing back. "I was there at the party," she said. "I heard Greg call Margaret just the babysitter." I watched Anna laugh, and I saw the look on Sophie's face when her grandmother handed her that envelope. She lit up. Not because it was money, but because it was love. Real love. The kind that doesn't need to be dressed up. The room was still. Even the judge paused to let the words settle. When it was all said and done, the judge spoke clearly, without hesitation. "I find no reason to grant fiduciary access to the parents. The trust is legal, valid, and in no way demonstrates harm to the child. What does concern me," she added, "is the parents' apparent willingness to weaponize family relationships for financial gain." Greg looked like he'd swallowed acid. Anna finally looked at me, but there was no hatred in her eyes anymore. only disbelief, like the life she'd always assumed was hers by right had been pulled out from under her, and she didn't know how to stand on her own feet. I stood and left without a word, because I didn't need to gloat. The truth had spoken for me, and this time, everyone heard it. I thought the courtroom would be the end, but it was only the beginning. By that weekend, a full write-up of the case appeared in the local paper under the headline, "Grandmother Wins Legal Battle to Protect Grandchild's Trust. Parents Accused of Financial Exploitation." And just like that, Anna and Greg became symbols, not of success, but of entitlement. The article went viral, shared in parenting groups, covered by online blogs, discussed on podcasts. People were fascinated, not just by the money, but by the morality. Comment sections exploded. This woman gave them a house, raised their child, and they called her a babysitter. Monsters. We need more grandmothers like this and fewer greedy Gregs. That little girl is lucky to have one person in her corner. Greg's company issued a quiet press release 2 days later, announcing his transition out of day-to-day operations. In other words, he was fired. Anna's influencer deals dried up completely. The brands that once praised her authentic motherhood persona now wanted distance, and fast. Even her curated Instagram, once filled with staged brunches and pastel outfits, was reduced to silence. Except for one last post, a photo of Sophie playing the piano, no caption, no hashtags, just silence. A silence that spoke louder than anything Anna had ever posted. And Sophie? She began to change too. She called me more, asked questions, started piano lessons, started asking about Madeline, about courage, about legacy, about truth. One night she asked if she could start her own journal. Not for school, she said, for real stuff, the stuff you don't say out loud. I handed her a leather-bound notebook I'd been saving for years. She ran her fingers over the cover like it was sacred. Someday, she said, I want to write my own story, like you. And that moment, it mattered more than any court win, any viral article, any revenge. Because legacy isn't just about what we leave behind. It's about who we leave it with. And I knew then, deep in my bones, Sophie would carry the best parts of me forward. Not the pain, not the bitterness, but the strength, the voice, the refusal to disappear quietly. The letter arrived on a Monday. Sophie had written it in pencil, her handwriting still curved and slightly uneven, just like when she used to label her lunchbox or sign birthday cards. It came folded in thirds, sealed with a pink sticker shaped like a heart. Inside were 6 words, simple, no decoration, no punctuation, just a message that stopped my breath. I know who really raised me. I read it twice, then a third time, and for the first time in months, maybe years, I allowed myself to feel the victory. Not the legal one, not the viral one, the real one, the one that mattered, because she saw me now, not as just the babysitter, not as a wallet or a fallback plan or a shameful reminder of their beginnings, but as the woman who had held her when she was sick, who hummed lullabies through heartbreak, who packed sandwiches in star-shaped cutters while the rest of the house slept, as her grandmother. 3 weeks after the letter, I received a request from Sophie. She wanted to spend a weekend with me, just us, no parents, no agenda. I said yes without hesitation. She arrived with a suitcase too big for a 2-day stay, a stack of books and a dozen questions. We baked muffins. We walked to the lake. We watched old movies on VHS and laughed at how ancient the picture quality looked. On Saturday night, she curled up next to me under the blanket and whispered, "Do you think they'll ever stop being mad at you?" I looked down at her. "I'm not sure," I said honestly, "but I'm not sorry for telling the truth, and I never will be." She nodded. "I think I'm glad you did." And then, softly, "I want to be the kind of person who says the truth, even when people don't like it." I kissed the top of her head. then you'll be more powerful than anyone in that house has ever been. Later that night, I took out something I hadn't looked at in years, a letter Madeline had written to me before she passed. Don't waste your final years explaining yourself to people who never learned how to listen. They will rewrite your story every chance they get. So make sure your last chapter is written in your own hand, clearly and without apology. I smiled. She would have loved Sophie. By the time I dropped her off at home Sunday evening, Anna didn't say much. She didn't glare. She didn't smile either. She just opened the door and watched as Sophie hugged me tightly on the front step. "I love you, Grandma." "Always," I whispered back. As she turned to go inside, Anna finally spoke. "She's different around you." "She's herself," I said. Anna's lips tightened. "Greg moved out," she said after a long pause. "He blames me, I blame him. We're both tired of the cycle." "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. Not because I wanted her back, but because I wouldn't wish this level of self-inflicted collapse on anyone. "I've lost a lot," she said quietly. "Then maybe it's time to start choosing differently," I replied. She looked away, nodded once, and closed the door behind her. I walked back to my car, slow and steady, and I didn't cry, not because it didn't hurt, but because I had nothing left to mourn, only things to protect, only things to grow. It's been a year now. Sophie writes me every week, sometimes long stories, sometimes just a funny doodle or a poem or a quote she heard in class. Last month she wrote, "Our teacher said people become the stories they're told about themselves, but I think we get to choose what we believe. Thank you for helping me believe I'm worth more." That one stays on my fridge, right next to the picture of her holding the envelope, grinning like she'd just been handed the whole world. Because in a way, she had. Not because of the money, but because someone saw her future and believed she was strong enough to carry it. As for me, I'm finally free. Not rich, not celebrated, not flawless, just free. Free of the need to be accepted by people who only loved me when I was silent. Free of the guilt they tried to bury me in. Free of the belief that sacrifice means nothing if no one claps for it. I used to think I had to earn my place in this family every single day, but now I know the truth. I already did. And that place, it lives in Sophie's heart now, and that is enough. Always will be.